grown up here, my kind of ancestry is way back, even like just in the townland here. So I remember like always growing up, my granddad telling stories about Kilmurray Castle and all about kind of people, older folk around. And he was just always, I think he would have been one of the main influences. I remember coming home from school, say in primary school, and we'd come in and he'd talk Irish to me in the evenings and that kind of thing. So that really would have sparked off a lot. And then he would be telling us about being descendant from John O'Donovan, of course, who everybody knows about in the parish, and some wider field as well. So I suppose that would just be a big influence. And then having EIGSE going on as well in the parish. Like I remember being very small, well not very small, but often going up to the EIGSE events, and I remember particularly Brian Farrell, when he would have been at the height of his popularity, he was giving one of the opening night lectures, and I can't remember what age I was, but I used to go up with my kind of little money in my fist going in the door, and I remember just so those kind of influences would have been huge. And then having places like Rapatrick and Kilmurray Castle and Darby O'Brien's Crosses and all those just a stone's throw away. But I think it was the kind of the family rootedness in the area, like knowing all things like the field names around here. And I know that when I went on to kind of study history more, one of the modules we did was place names. And they were saying, instead of everybody doing an essay on place names, why don't some of you, would you be able to do field names? And I was kind of going, sure, all of the fields around here all had names, and they had been kept on through my grandfather and mum and all the rest. So that was nothing new to me, nothing strange that fields would have names, which is only just a very simple example. And
did you do a project on it?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, at the time, I did that was really interesting as well, because I did an essay on it, and then I kind of spoke to some of the older people in the area. And the same thing, a little bit hesitant at first, and then when you're saying to them, I'm not kind of trying to be critical, I just want the kind of info, and you'd sit down and make a cup of tea and have a chat. And I remember Margaret Fitzgerald over in Ballynamona, and we sat down and she gave me great names, and Denny Welch in Ballynamona as well, and actually not that long after I'd finished, both of them had passed away by that stage as well. So it's, it shows the importance as well of doing things like recording, and like what we're doing here as well, the whole social history and the history of the parish and the people, and a lot of the kind of stories, and that when things are a little bit more modern now, maybe some of those stories are kind of pushed to one side a little bit, or not taken with the same seriousness, I suppose, or they're just cast aside, and that's old tales and pishogues and that kind of thing. But they're all important too. They all have their place. So like a lot of the folklore, there's it might not be exactly accurate, but there's usually a kernel of truth in it somewhere, and you can kind of start from there. So yeah.
And from that time where you went around talking to the old people in the area, was there anything that surprised you, or that you found interesting?
I suppose it was things that they kind of just reinforced what you already knew in a way, like things like that, stuff like the field names, and that there was a lot of Irish names still left, and some were English names, and there was kind of reasons for that. And it was I think more than finding maybe new information, it just, as I said, reinforced what was kind of there. But it was great just to be able to record those, and to be able to take out the Ordnance Survey map and actually mark those fields and their names. And probably a lot of those now are probably not used now, because unless they're usually passed through the families, and that they're not going to be kept on. So yeah.
And did you get a chance to talk to Dan Downing?
Yeah, Dan and myself, if I may say, are good pals. So I didn't do it for that one, because that was what we did, was we took just the immediate area around here. But Dan is a mine of information. Like, he's really helpful as well, when you kind of have a query or a question, and you ask, when there's people like that. Dan would have known my granddad very well as well. That's always a good opener into things too. And granddad would have been the milkman for a long time, so he would have delivered milk back in the days around Ferrybank and Glenmore and Slieverue. And you'd say, you'd introduce yourself, and then you'd say, Dick Wall's granddaughter. Like, oh yeah. So that was a real kind of connection thing as well. So.
And can you remember any of the stories your granddad told you?
Well, I suppose one that kind of comes immediately to mind would have been, he had a story about Kilmurray Castle, and about they ploughing the field, that there was a graveyard, that the family or not the family, but the local lore was that there was a graveyard down there. and that they had ploughed the field, and next morning when they went back that the sod had turned back, you know, these kind of stories, which again, but there was a chapel in the castle in Kilmurray, so that's another, and there's the Holy Well down there as well. So obviously it was one of these stories that people were told, you know, don't be interfering kind of in because it's, you know, a holy place or whatever, and that was the kind of way that the story had been passed on to them. So yeah, those kind of things. I remember one time he told me about the banshee as well. That's the one time he wasn't impressed with me that evening because I was getting a bit older and I wasn't really listening to this as well. And it was the one time he was quite serious that the banshee was real and that he had heard her, and I can't remember now what the circumstance was, but yeah, he wasn't impressed. Now I didn't take that too seriously. So, but yeah, I suppose those kind of tales.
Because I mean, they did believe in it. Didn't they?
Oh yeah, hugely. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Which is interesting. And I suppose a lot changed with electricity and stuff like that too as well.
Yeah, like I would imagine, you know, you'd even see it yourself out here kind of when you go for a walk at night and you're off the main kind of street and you're down some of the side roads and it's really dark, and every little rustle and every kind of branch that's coming out, it's something there to, you know, attack you. Your imagination gets very fertile when it's dark around. So yeah, I can imagine that they kind of would have bred up these stories, I'm sure.
So Peter, tell us a little bit about the churches, because I know you're a bit of an expert on. Just tell us a little bit about your academic background.
Well, academically, when I finished school, I went to the Tech in Slieverue, and when I finished school, sure, like everyone else, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I do remember Jim Welch was our principal at the time, and Jim was a bit of a career kind of guidance as well at the same time. And I remember having a chat with him, and Jim taught us science, and so I had, as I say now, it was pick of the week that week. I put down applied biology and WIT, and I did that for 2 years, but it wasn't my cup of tea. So we didn't have history on the curriculum in the Tech, and so I just always had this kind of curiosity, and like with me, when I read about a stone in the field, that's, you know, I just want to know everything about it. It's not good enough that it's just there. It's, you know, what is it? And
how come you didn't have history in the gym too?
Because it was a vocational school, I suppose. So that's just, yeah,
so
the focus would have been more on, yeah, absolutely. But like, it was very advanced too at the time, because when I remember I made my confirmation in 1990, so I would have moved into the Tech at that year, September 90. And I think we were the second class. It was compulsory for all of us to do technical graphics. That would have been unheard of at the time. And then we all had to do, there was choices in various subjects, but we all had to try metalwork and woodwork for, I think it was until Christmas, from September to Christmas, and you had to do it and give it your best and see how you get on with it. And then, so like, you know, I think they were quite early, I think, in some of those you know, ways with subjects. And yeah, absolutely, yeah. I mean, because, you know, now everybody and home economics as well was like totally a girl's subject, but some of the boys in my class did home economics right the way through. So yeah, I think they broke the mold a bit on some of those things.
So was it Jim that influenced in the history?
Well, yeah, I mean, Jim would have certainly have been part of the EIGSE and all the rest. And so I made the decision then, I started work then, and again, that was kind of history based. And then I started to do the Maynooth campus had opened an outreach campus in Kilkenny. They used the old St. Kieran's College. And people like Bishop Forrestal would have been very supportive of that at the time. And I think Billy Murphy, who was at the Avonmore at the time, he would have been I think he was one of the board members of that as well. So it got a lot of help at that stage to kind of start moving in Kilkenny. And so I would have been on the second intake there, and I did a certificate in local history, and I actually picked John O'Donovan and place names, and that was my kind of essay for the first year. And that kind of harkened back as well, because when we were in 6th class, EIGSE had held a competition, and myself and Breda Irish did a project on O'Donovan, and we won first prize. And there's a photograph somewhere of I think it was John O'Callaghan presenting us with 2 tickets to it was 2 family tickets on the train to Dublin, which was like fantastic. But yeah, I mean, even back then that was kind of the parallels as well. But so I started to do the certificate in history, and then I just continued on. So worked.
I know you're a doctor.
Now I'm a doctor, yeah. But no, if you don't have any medical ailments now, we're okay.
And you lecture in Maynooth?
Oh, well, I lecture a bit now. Not that's kind of a part-time. I would do more, say, like local history groups would contact me, and I've given a good few talks around the country, and basically then I published the kind of content of my PhD thesis, and there would have been a lot, again, support people like Jim and Catherine and those, and people around the parish would have been very supportive as well, and they'd be always checking in and how are you going and how's and keep at it, and so there's it's a great community from that point of view as well. And then I suppose the church history point of view, like a kind of monastic period, is medieval is my main sort of focus, but we're just so steeped in Slieverue to have something like Rapatrick, to have the physical remains of a church from the 10th century that's pretty phenomenal. I don't think there are too many small parishes in the country that can actually have that kind of unbroken physical sort of history from the 10th century right up to the present day. Rapatrick, it would have been the medieval parish church, and it part of the church is 10th century, and then a little bit more added on in the 13th century. And at that stage, the way things would have worked, it would have been appropriated to Kilculheen, to the Augustinian convent down, Ferrybank. And most people would know it now as would be opposite where Tom Powers is, so that general area. And so a lot of the churches in the area would have kind of paid a tithe or whatever to the monastery. And that's what Rapatrick was. It would have been the parish church for the area, and it continued on. We know that in through the 14th century, there's records of it, and then there was probably an earlier church there as well, because the place name would kind of tell you that too. So it would be even earlier. But right through then into the penal times, obviously, excuse me, on Catholicism, and that was suppressed as well. The Catholic community wouldn't have actually been probably using it there, but there's a folklore record of a church called the Loch Church, I think, that being set up. So probably wasn't a big church now. It was probably a kind of a small space that they would have used, and that was in the 1700s. But Rapatrick itself was said to have been in fairly good condition, I think, right up until about the late 1600s. And then it would have just been pretty kind of left to go. It wouldn't have been, because of all the circumstances at the time, then it would have not been used actively, we'll say, by the community there. But the other, I suppose, the graveyard obviously was continued to be used as well. And the Darby O'Brien pieces are over there. So Darby, or he's sometimes known as Derby, he was, I think he's a great character, because he was said to have been an illiterate, just kind of normal person like any of the rest of us, and he memorialized some of his family. He just wanted to record their passing, like any of us do with headstones today, and he would have carved their beautiful high relief. They're I suppose simple in one way, and you could be really critical and say, they're not really up to the standard. But when you look at what they are, early kind of 18th century pieces carved by, one of our own. He would have been from Luffney originally, and recording family members back from 1690. So they're incredible to still have those. And there's probably a wayside cross as well in Luffney that he carved too. And but the beautiful thing, he usually has his own initial, and then just the initials of whoever he's kind of commemorating, and the date of death on those as well. But I think when you go into Rapatrick, it's kind of, it's kind of the simplicity of it that really is kind of very powerful over there. And then we still have the cemetery mass there every year as well, which is, it's lovely just to have just in the open air, and you kind of come together and remember those people as well. And then I suppose what Derby did, because a lot of, say, normal everyday people, they wouldn't have really had any headstones. They only come into vogue really you'd be lucky if you had kind of late 1600s, and he just really marks the very beginning of that whole phase. And then I suppose we switch over to the parish church in Slieverue. There was an older parish of Ida, which kind of was set up in the 1620s, and that kept going until the 1840s. So that would have been basically what's now Glenmore, Slieverue and Ferrybank were all kind of combined. And then they were divided in the 1840s, and Glenmore was established by itself. And then we had the parish of Slieverue, which would have been basically Slieverue and Ferrybank kind of joined together. That was Slieverue. And the parish church now in Ferrybank, that would have been built as a chapel of ease from Slieverue into Waterford, and then Ferrybank was established as its own parish in 1970, which is quite recent. And Slieverue then kind of became as what we would know it now as Slieverue parish only at that stage. And our church, the current parish church, dates to 1800, but there would have been an earlier church pretty much in the village as well, probably very close to where the actual church is today as well. And that 1800 church then, again, like that's really impressive too, because we didn't gain Catholic full emancipation until 1829, and yet they were quite willing. It's the second oldest parish church in the diocese, so they were up and ready to stake their claim as well, and to, just showed how important their faith was to them all as well. And the land for the church was given by John Snow of Snow Hill in memory of his wife, and 4 masses were to be said every year for the repose of her soul, and that had happened certainly right up into the 20th century. And then the church itself was built by subscription, so the normal parishioners put their hand in their pocket and the church was constructed at that stage. So again, I suppose kind of very simple church in one way, but as I said, ahead of its time maybe in another aspect. And it's just a very simple nave and the chancel and the north and south. We technically call them the transepts, but to us the men's side and the women's side, which it always is. And just some beautiful little simple kind of just doorways, just very simple cut limestone on the way in, and no big deal, but yet a huge work to have constructed that back at the time as well. And I suppose then it just continued on in the 1900s. Then there was a kind of the first, I suppose, refurbishment century after the first construction took place in about the 1900s. So that cost him something like, I think it was £337, which would have been fairly substantial. And a new floor was put in at that stage. A new organ was purchased. And then as things progressed, and I suppose they saw that they needed extra bits and bobs, and the 1910-11, then the railings and the wall at the front and the gates would have been put up at that stage, again by subscription. I think they fundraised was £170 or something for that. And then shortly after the 1920s, they had to extend the graveyard. So a field was bought from Mrs. Stapleton, and I think there was a parish meeting, and they decided to put, my understanding is to put basically a levy kind of on every parish, on every house in the parish, and that's how they paid for the extra for the graveyard, which is the graveyard that's still that's nearly full now today. And one actually family connection to that was that my granddad's uncle gave a portion of land for the graveyard as well, and he was paid £5. So he gave back the £5 and he gave an additional £5, and those were given to it was a diocesan fund for sick clergy. So he wouldn't take the money, but the transaction had to take place, and then he had to give it back. Yeah. So he then said that for the family story is that he would be remembered, that the family would be remembered in masses for as long as Ossory was Ossory, and that's the way they did those things. And other people then had given land as well. And the new wall, then the wall all at the back of the graveyard, that was erected in about 1924 as well. I think something like, that's incredible, something like it's 807 feet long, but they had to build it. It was to be built 5'6" high and 6 feet under the ground. So like, that's a massive construction. You talk about walls today. And so that was a huge undertaking as well, and that was all paid for by subscription by the parish as well. And then I suppose they started to accumulate things as well. The baptismal font was donated in 1920, and the Paschal candle holder that we still have was also donated in 1920 as well. And I suppose the big thing then would have been the stained glass windows. So there's 13 windows, but two are a little bit earlier, 2 on either side of the altar. You don't really see them unless you're actually on the sanctuary. And the other 11 then were they were £50 each, and people donated those, and their names are on those who donated. So that, I suppose, that really would have been the church that we know kind of came in, at that stage with the beautiful windows and all the rest. That was 1924. And then I suppose their next really big thing, obviously then after the Vatican Council, they had to move the altars, and there was the altar rails and all that. So there's some photographs obviously of, the altar rails still being there, and the old, what I remember was the wooden, there was a wooden altar and a wooden tabernacle. And then in 1994 we did the very big renovation. That was just a complete overhaul, new roof, just everything plastered, electrics, and new altar was put in at that stage, and the ambo was changed, and it was beautiful. And then it would have been carpeted at that stage. It was bare wood up to then. So I suppose very simple. And then just with times things change as well. And I suppose that would have been the last big outlay at that stage. That was 97. And then we had, of course, the 3 ordinations, you could say, then in more recent times. So in 2000, Father Mark Condon was ordained. And then in 2015, Father Brian Griffin, well, Brian was ordained in Kilkenny, but the first Mass was here in the parish. And then this year, Father Liam O'Donovan. So I suppose the way things are now, we had the mission as well in the last couple of years, and now it's help afterwards, and you put on the tea, and there's so many people come in and give help and make the buns and the cakes and the sandwiches, and so it's still our way of our kind of community supporting each other. Yeah.
Can I go back to a few things?
Yeah.
One is that what was it Rat Patrick was the Augustinians originally?
Yeah, well, it would have been the way they kind of worked was they were set up as parish churches, but they kind of would have been, how would you say, they were appropriated to the local. So I suppose the priest would probably come from being associated with the monasteries. Now, obviously, that was a convent, but in many of them, there would have been a priest would have come out, or they would have paid for the priest to have been.
And the abbey, as in the ferry bank, was that the abbey?
Yeah, that's yeah.
So you're saying the opposite powers.
Well, there's a Church of Ireland church there now.
Yes.
Yeah, that general area, I believe.
That was the original abbey.
Yeah, and that was a very substantial foundation there. Yeah,
Augustinians.
that was Augustinians. Yeah.
And so therefore this would be part of that whole.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah,
parish
part of the remit. Yeah, and then they would have been dissolved in 1540, and then I suppose in 1620, then that new parish of Ida was established. So then you had kind of penal times as well. So that's kind of part of the whole kind of progression of the politics as well.
And then how do they? The way the Ferrybank and Slieverue and Glenmore were all one parish. One stage, right?
Yeah.
How did they split up then? Was that got to do with politics within the?
I guess it would have been a lot. It would have been probably population.
Okay.
At that stage, and I suppose things were how would you say? I suppose there would have been probably parish churches or churches in each one, and they just decided that for kind of administration and things, and they would have had, of course, more priests at that stage as well, because you're at the kind of really high point at that stage. So it probably just made more sense for everybody that you could just make smaller parishes instead of having larger areas, and probably I suppose for administration of the parish it was just a bit easier. Then population, I'd say, would have been the big thing.
And then we spoke about Derby.
Yeah.
Where did he get? Where was the stone from?
Most of that is local stone because it has that kind of red tinge, the Slieverue tinge in it. So yeah, it would have been. It's quite rough. It is just he got his stone and he just the hammer and chisel and out he went.
Particular quarry?
No, I don't believe so. No.
Okay, and then the future of the church.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you see? I mean, in the sense of like we say, like we can see it elsewhere that there's less and less priests.
Yeah.
There's less and less masses now, and less attendance as well. So what do you think?
Well, I suppose like I probably from kind of the study point of view, I probably have maybe a little broader kind of picture because I look back and you see like 1540 and the massive impact of the Reformation and the establishment of the Church of Ireland or Church of England or Protestant faith, whichever you want, and this rupturing of everything at that stage. And I'm sure the people then thought couldn't see a future, and yet here we are. And again, penal times. I mean, they really had to fight for it, and there was stories, of people, having mass rocks, and that's probably what that lock church was, and that they would put up a screen or a sheet between the celebrant and the congregation so that when they were hauled in and questioned, they could genuinely say that they didn't know what the celebrant looked like. So I'm sure those people couldn't maybe see a future either, and yet we're still here. So yeah, I'd be very hopeful. I mean, things will certainly have to change, and maybe, I don't know, less masses or whatever the situation may be.
Could you see the 3 parishes come back together again?
Well, you never know. You really never know. I don't know. I'd say Ferrybank now is probably a bit big if we're coming back in. But yeah, I mean, it's change is inevitable. It's going to have to happen. And I suppose we're just going to have to fight for holding on to what we want as well. So that's, I guess, the other side of things too. But yeah, I mean, I would see all these things as very cyclical as well. And I think people might be a bit nonchalant, but when things are really under threat, then I think you'll see people kind of banding together as well. So that one is my parents' wedding. So that was 52 years ago this year. That's actually my granduncle, Father Pat. But the thing about this, I suppose, that this is the altar here. So this is the wooden actual altar table. And here we have, these are some of the altar rails, which is completely alien sort of to us now to see altar rails. That's just the same, the shot from the other side. So these are the altar rails right around here. And then you can see how high the priest is. And you can even just see the altar server. He's just standing. It's like at the height of the... So that's just on that one.
Pre-Vatican.
Pre-Vatican II. Well, no, this is post-Vatican II. So the altar table is out, but it's just, I mean, it's kind of alien to most of us to even think about altar rails.
The idea is that you're part of the...
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And then the confession box over there. I remember those confession boxes been there. That's that early. That's probably. I think it's 1920, 1897. I think they're absolutely beautiful stained glass windows. Those two are different to the rest of them. And then just we have, I suppose, the contrast to that. Then this is that's my sister's wedding. That's in 1990. So you can see the bare floor. It's just so sparse looking. The prie-Dieux are still the same. The confession, that's my granny and granddad. The confession boxes, and again just the actual altar, the wooden altar there as well. And this one, the newer, the 1924, the new windows, and the gallery. Then that's changed now as well. It's not open in the same way now. And obviously the tablets. That's the tablet dedicated to the actual original foundation. So John Snow and Eliza Snow are mentioned on that one.
Did you say there was one side men and one side women?
Yeah, that's the men's side. Yeah.
Okay.
The men's and the women's, still known as. Well, we're not that strictly divided now, but it is still, and that's the altar. That's the way I would remember now. It was like that until 97 or 94 when we did the big renovation. We'll say so. Most people would recognise that, the altar, and then the small tabernacle, and that's the sacristy door. And then I'd even forgotten until I was actually looking at these photographs that the ambo was on the other side at that stage. And then that's the.
What's the ambo?
The ambo, the lectern where they read the readings, and then that's the. As I was saying, the Paschal candle holder that was donated in 1920, and then the priest's seat, and then we contrast that with that's what it looks like more or less today. So it's a bit of a transformation.
Would you have known the Latin Mass and all that?
No, I'm way too young for that. I don't know.
What about the Irish Mass in Australia? Was that ever out here?
I don't know, unless they had it on occasions, but no, I don't think.
Okay.
There's those ones, and then this is just I suppose that's the 1994. So everything was just completely stripped. You can see the stained glass windows had been removed at that stage, and then there was an extra protection put over those when they went back in, and just new roof and electrics, and that's obviously our belfry there. That's an original. That's 1800, and so you can see like how much work was actually just done at that stage. That's actually probably first in sequence. I'd say that's the old roof and stuff, and then the beautiful little cross just on the end there, the Balnamona door on that side, and then she was coming back together at that stage, and so the new roof on, and our window still blocked up still, and then we have the plaster back on at that stage as well, and then it looks a little bit more like. This is a more modern. This is a few weeks ago when we just at the ordination time. So those are the original, as I said, the railings and that went in 1910, 1911. And so this is Stapleton's here. So obviously they had the field at the back, and that's the field that they purchased then to extend.
And was that local metalwork done?
That now I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. And that's what we know today. And then the trees, there was two huge trees on either end, and then they were planted. I'm not sure when they were planted, and then they were cut down a couple of years ago. It was gone a bit over the top at that stage. And so that's, and these probably aren't great pictures, but that's one of the Derby crosses. So that's that one is actually now not in Rapatrick, but it just shows kind of how crude it is in one sense, but having said that, you're back in 1736, so it's pretty impressive to have.
Where's that one now?
That's just on, it's a little bit in off the road going towards the Rue Glen. And then the 1690 date on that one. And then these are three of the ones that are in three of the beautiful ones over in Rapatra graveyard itself, so they're still there. So that's those. So again, you know, kind of crude, but yet, I don't know, something really nice about them at the same time.
Absolutely.
And then I suppose between both cemeteries, like we cover, I think, nearly every conceivable type of monument and headstone for 450 years. So again, I don't think just many parishes can kind of have that claim to fame as well. So yeah, it's pretty good.